All right, so we're jumping into Habakkuk.
Yeah.
Did we land on the way we're saying that?
No, I'm going to say it different probably every time.
Okay.
Habakkuk.
Uh-huh.
Habakkuk.
That's the one. That's the one we need. That's the one we need. So, who is he?
So Habakkuk is someone that we do not know a whole lot about. History tells us that he lived somewhere about 600 years before Jesus. Biblical scholars assume that he had something to do with worship in and around the temple, just because of the way the book unfolds. Writes a song, worship. He uses specific details in there that go beyond just someone that'll be writing.
Yeah.
So I think they associate it with some type of a worship leader.
Yeah, like if he wasn't that, he clearly knew his way around the temple and those systems and what they had in place.
Yeah.
As a worship guy, that always sticks out to me. As
you were excited. You were excited about it.
Yeah, I was. This is gonna be good. Worship leaders writing a book.
Yeah,
this is gonna be good.
Yeah. He's a prophet. He's a minor prophet, but they call them minor prophets because they're short. The writing is short.
Yeah.
Versus the Isaiah or Jeremiah, super long in the things that they write. So they call them minor, not because what they say doesn't matter.
Right.
It's just how they group them together.
Yeah, and this is the only time we see him referenced. We see his story, and this is about it as far as what we know about him.
But it's really good.
It is really good.
And it's perfectly germane to what's going on in society. And it's kind of why we picked this prophet to study during this time in this season, because of what's going on in our country, what's going on in our world.
Yep.
And, we find ourselves as a nation, it seems to be a 48-52 split, depending on which way you're looking at it. It's so easy to take our faith and wrap it right up in the middle of all of that. And so my hope in this series is to not make the important things the ultimate things, because what I know is after this election that's coming up, there are going to be many people that are thrilled and there are going to be many people that are devastated, and we're all going to be pretty sure that the end of the world is coming.
Right.
And it's kind of synonymous with what Habakkuk was going through at the time. And the perspective that he gives us in this teaching is so vital for us to shape our hearts around kingdom, around God's view of justice, and that God is still on the throne.
Mm-hmm. To realize in the big the world's been ending for a long time is what I've heard. You know what I mean?
None of this is surprising, God.
Yeah.
Although we're surprised every day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Even you mentioned his name to me earlier. Even that, I think that's always interesting to me. Just the kind of pulling those threads about how God weaves these details in so beautifully. But can you talk about his name and just the meaning of it?
Yeah, it's interesting. As a preacher, you can always try to find meaning in everything.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes there is. And so his name means, it's one of two things, and it could be both. The name means in its simplest form to embrace, but it's over the years, because of his writing and because of what Habakkuk is known for, means to wrestle with his faith, wrestle with what God is doing. And so that knowledge of embrace seems to be whether his parents knew way in advance and God gave them that name,
right,
or whether it was just perfect, worked out. But really that's what he does, is he embraces, or he is wrestling through this topic.
Yeah, I love it. And it's kind of perfect for a 3-week series, 3 chapters.
Yeah, 3 chapters.
And really defined chapters. It tells almost a story.
The thing that makes his writing different than the other writings, most of the time when you hear about a prophet, it's a prophet coming down out of the mountains to tell the people what God has said to that prophet to speak to them. What makes Habakkuk different is this is a conversation that Habakkuk is having with God about the people.
Right.
So it's kind of a reverse conversation. So when you look at it, the chapter 1 actually the whole book is a back and forth between God and Habakkuk. But chapter 1 is Habakkuk wondering why God is slow to dole out justice where injustice is unfolding.
Right.
Chapter 2, and it's a little bit of all of it, but chapter 2 is him waiting for the reply, getting the reply, and really having to wrestle through what God is giving him. So there's the wondering why justice is taking so long, and then God responds, and then chapter 3 is a worship song.
Oh yeah,
that's right, what you're here for. So it's the worship song, or the outpouring of the experience that he has with God.
Right. It is an interesting look into a guy who is both, I don't know if you want to, frustration is probably too small a word for what it's anguish, personal. Yeah. So he both is anguished and just so confused and wondering about this to God, but also has such trust in him that he's taken it to him. It's
but his trust is challenged deeply. Right? So the thing I love about this is every person that's listening to this podcast, every person that's going to be there on a Sunday will have had to face times in their life where they said, is God even just? Like we're seeing things unfold in this world where we're going, surely somebody should punish these people, or why did that person get away with that? That's right at the heart of what Habakkuk is crying out to God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that kind of dialogue that Habakkuk has with God, and that really wrestling. How do we relate that to us? We see this person, this context, this time in history, but there's always lessons, I think, to be learned. And how do you see that unfold just between trust and waiting? That's such a difficult concept for us, the waiting.
I'll even phrase it in an additional way. What he does, it almost seems like society has encouraged us not to do, which is to push back on God, right? So like trust in the waiting, but he's doing something that I think our parents or us as parents would get really frustrated if our kids were doing. Like he sees something that's going on and he's I'll stop short at saying he's mad at God, but he's like, where are you?
Yeah.
Like, I know these things about you, so why are you not responding, God?
Yeah.
Then wait for the lightning, right, to strike us. That's the place that we find Habakkuk in.
His view of who he knew God to be didn't add up to what he looked around in the world. Those two didn't line up.
Yeah, God, this is not the way this is supposed to be. So what happened? Like, are you who you say you are? Because you're not moving at my speed, and I see there's a lot of broken stuff around. And I mean, I think you should do this, but
we would never do that.
But we would never do that. We would never do that to our parents, or we would pay severely for it. But what you find is that in the wrestling, he learns about some of the attributes of God. He learns that God is dedicated to justice, but it is in God's time and God's plan how it unfolds. And so I think in the uncomfortable nature of forcing the question back towards God, you see Habakkuk go through a period of growth where he starts off in chapter 1 wondering. Chapter 2 is waiting for the response. And then chapter 3, and both of those two things lead to worship. It does not lead to what he wants necessarily, except for maybe ultimately he wants God's design or God's desire.
Yeah.
So maybe he goes in with one goal and comes out with another, and isn't that the journey?
Right.
Right.
And you get a beautiful preacher alliteration out of it with the wonder, waiting, and worship.
That's right.
Gotta have that.
Yeah. Sure.
So give us kind of a brief overview, since you mentioned kind of how the book is structured. What are we digging into? What do we see in chapter 1? What does that wondering look like?
Whether he was alive or not, he would have known what happened in the northern kingdom. So Israel at this time frame is split into the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. He would have been speaking predominantly to the southern kingdom, Judah, maybe Jerusalem. You can tell he probably was in and around the temple. So speaking to that group of people, he would have either watched it or known it to happen where the Assyrians came in and overthrew the northern kingdom. So right on their doorstep is a foreign army. And while they are now still governing forward as the southern kingdom, he's looking around and he's seeing all of this injustice from the people of God. So chapter 1 starts off with him looking at his own people and saying, God, why are you allowing this stuff to happen? Yeah. Especially in light of what just took place up north. Yeah. And so he asks that question, and maybe it was rhetorical. I don't know. Why are you allowing this to happen? In the back of his mind, knowing that God was going to take care of it. But as you get into the next part of chapter 1, God responds, and God basically says, I got a plan, and you can't even fathom.
Won't understand.
Yeah, not only will you not understand, it's going to blow your brain. Like the use of the Hebrew in this deals with the astounded nature of what you're going to see, that you're going to be dumbfounded by it. And he is. Like it breaks his brain. So God responds, says, I've got a plan, and you're not going to like it. Yeah. In fact, the plan is much worse than you could ever possibly imagine.
Yeah.
And then there's a time period after that where then after God responds, Habakkuk jumps back in as a true worship leader. And it's almost like it's written in words that you read, but it almost feels like a song.
Yeah.
Like Good Father.
Sure.
Because he names God about 7 different names to remind God of who God is.
Is this sucking up a little bit?
Maybe.
Like,
yeah, maybe.
God,
Yeah. Are you sure this is what you want to do? Like, I'm going to remind you, God, of who you are.
Right.
And so that's the way he starts. And then he makes this complaint to God, or makes this complaint in the Hebrew is used to kind of denote, okay, God, you're saying that you're going to do that. It does not make any sense to me.
Yeah.
So let me tell you why it doesn't make any sense. Because here's where, not where you're wrong, but here's the problems that I see. And he ultimately ends, it feels like his last few statements are almost despair. We live in Gulf Breeze, so we're around fish, we're around water. Think of a cast net. Are we just bait that gets sucked up in a net to be thrown off to the side or caught on a hook? And is that really what the meaning of life is? And so he ends on a down note in his conversation with God. Mm-hmm. But when you get to the very first verse in chapter 2, even after the complaint, even after the frustration, even after all of the pushing back on God, he takes a position of, but I'm going to wait and I'm going to listen.
Yeah.
I heard a preacher this week say, sometimes if you don't know what to do, it's probably best to shut up.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what he does. Like he got to a place where his mind was blown about what God's response was going to do. And so he just gets up into a very high place, which is, and we'll teach this, but it's indicative of a different perspective, a better perspective, and he's going to wait and see what God does to get the response.
Yeah, do you think there's a lesson even in that? He's alone and he went up high. Even just his posture in that moment says something.
1,000%.
Yeah.
No question. And I've not studied this yet, but I just by thinking about it for 30 seconds, the positioning of him in these different chapters in the transitions is so important. And it tells us something about our hearts, right or wrong. It tells us something about maybe how we should position ourselves for response or for best practices going forward.
Yeah. I love it, man. Can't wait to dive into it.
This is going to be awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.